guys, this is the Diesel Queen. I have some exciting news for you. This March, when you buy a diesel decoder, you will get exclusive access to a question and answer panel with me personally. This is going to be limited to only the people that buy diesel decoders. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to talking to you guys. In addition, you will also be getting 6 months of completely free access to the diesel repair platform, which is called the Wikipedia of truck repair. And on top of that, you will also be getting a voucher to go to one of our top training classes in the United States. It's an in-person training class. This only lasts through March, and it's only available with the people that buy the Diesel Laptops decoder. Don't wait. Sign up for it if you've been waiting on buying it or waiting to figure out if you want it or not. March is the month to get it.
Hey guys, welcome back to Overhauled with me, the Diesel Queen. Today I am here with Eugene, who has some interesting topics about wages and health insurance, and actually really diving deep into figuring out your wages and what's worth it, because it's not always just about your hourly rate. So Eugene, why don't you introduce yourself, kind of give us a little bit of a background as to how you got into this industry.
Hey, my name's Eugene Torkelson. I'm 62 years old, and I've only been doing the diesel end of things since about 2017. Prior to that was very little. Maybe a tractor engine once in a while when I used to work for John Deere, but mostly I've been in lawn and garden for 40 years. So the biggest diesels I usually worked on were the little Yanmars and Kubotas. Like I said, I started working for our county and have been in the shop there. And so I've had a whole different getting involved in this from a different angle than what most people do, and at a lot older age. My background, like I said, has been small engines, so chainsaws, trimmers, mowers, ATVs, motorcycles. I was familiar with that kind of thing, but I used to always tell everybody I liked working on lawnmower stuff, small engines, because I could pick it up and put it on the bench. And that's changed.
Yep.
Now you don't pick it up, you figure out other ways of doing it.
Yep.
You work a little smarter, not harder.
Yep. Well, that's what I've always told people, like with the heavy equipment stuff, is, everybody's always asking me like, oh my God, you're so small. How do you work on something so big? I don't understand. And it's like, everything is so big that everybody uses a crane. The big like corn-fed motherfucker in the shop ain't lifting half that shit. So, it's actually easier. I've tried to explain that to people a million times. I think heavy equipment's easier on you than light, because you're not able to lift. You're not going to be lifting a head off of 15 or a 16 or even probably a 12 liter and up engine. You're not, the strong guy in the shop's not going to be lifting that head off. From
a 100-pound lawnmower to a 1,900-pound dozer transmission, it's
yep.
You do it differently.
Exactly. And I think it's easier a little bit. Like, obviously, like swinging the hammers and driving pins out and stuff like that, I think that's kind of hard on your body. But as far as the lifting stuff goes, you're not lifting a lot of this shit. Because, like you said, no one's going to be lifting a 1,900-pound transmission. That's just not even realistic. And if they try, they're an idiot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And Kat's got that figured out. That was a breeze pulling out of that.
So I've heard from my father. So I've heard from him. He is a Caterpillar man by heart.
Just fly right out.
That's what I've been told. I've never seen it, but that's what I've been told.
I could not believe it. But
well, John Deere does it completely different than Caterpillar.
Oh.
We don't even have transmissions in our dozers. It's all hydrostatic.
Well, this is I guess I wouldn't call it a hydrostat as such, but it's a hydraulic shifted and stuff, but it's geared inside.
Yeah.
We had a relief valve that got some stuff underneath it and was stuck and the thing wouldn't move. That was fun in the pit. But then
boy.
We got lucky and it all of a sudden decided to move and load. So we did get it in the shop, but slid it out and probably wouldn't have had to. But we went ahead and slid it out so we could drain everything, clean everything, flush out all the inside, which turned out to be really clean. But that's all it was, just a little speck of stuff underneath a relief valve.
It's amazing how the tiniest little things can affect the hydraulic system.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I've seen that too. I've seen it where there's been little bitty pieces of dirt that get inside them little valves and little control valves, and they stick, sometimes, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes things like that can be really fucking hard to diagnose. You really got to look at a hydraulic schematic, and you really got to read and look and follow the flow patterns and pay attention to, if this valve is sticking, what's going to happen down the line.
Right.
And that's kind of, to me, what makes the difference between a parts changer and a mechanic is
figuring it
that
out.
Exact stuff, figuring it out. And hydraulics can be it's not just a pump and some hoses and some cylinders. Hydraulics can be pretty extensive. And like you said, like transmissions have hydraulics now. Our backhoes had, some hydraulics, like the internals, obviously they had like a normal gear and hydraulic clutch pack transmission. And then obviously the rest of the backhoe has 2 control valves and a load sense. And then the load sensing system is a whole nother deal to wrap your head around. The load sense and, open center valves versus closed center valves. There's a whole different way the system works. And if you don't understand how those control valves work, open center versus a closed center and reading schematics, it's going to be really fucking hard to figure out what's going on. When I took a capstone training for excavators, they did it completely different than every other capstone I've ever been in. Every capstone I've been in for John Deere was, we bug it. They bugged it, right? They would bug the electric side. They'd pull wires out from the back of connectors, right? Like little tiny things, or put a bad CAN bus termination resistor in there, or all kinds of things, right? Electrical that you could see, right? You could figure out if you really pinpointed it down and you really did your diagnostics, you could find what they did to it. In my excavator capstone class, they actually were taking control valves and taking relief valves and shit out of that pilot manifold. And they were putting bad control valves and shit and regulators in the pumps. And like they were doing all kinds of stuff that there's no way, unless you tore it apart, you would know what they did.
Right.
But it forced you to use the schematic. And that's what you had to do. You had to, figure out which functions were working and which weren't, because excavators, the control valve has 2 halves, and each half runs some of the controls, and then the other half runs the other amount of controls. And you got to really fucking put your brain together to figure that out. And pretty much the only way you could figure it out is take the symptoms and look at the schematic and figure out what they fucking did.
Yeah, it's just like a liquid wiring diagram. I mean, you're looking through, you got diodes, you got resistors, you got, the same thing in hydraulics. It just does different functions. You're just doing it with liquid instead of electricity.
Yeah.
They tell us in electricity, if you have trouble reading a diagram, just think of it as plumbing.
Yep.
You're flowing water, which, sometimes that works.
Electrical and hydraulics is the 2 things that I've learned over the course of the 7 years I've been in it that most people struggle with.
Yeah.
And usually mechanics either get electrics really well and they understand it, or they get hydraulics really well and understand it. But what I've learned is if you have a guy that's really good at electrical diagnostics and understanding electrics, he's probably going to understand hydraulics really well.
Right.
Where if you have a guy that's really good with hydraulics, they might still struggle with electrical, which was me, but Yeah, I think it's people don't really take the time to understand. You have to understand how it's supposed to work before you have any hope in hell of diagnosing something that's wrong, especially when it's minute, right? Customers complaining about, a little bit of the functions are slowed is what they say, or, their cylinder seems like it's drifting, or, really minute things. We've had a couple customers take us for a run for their money on like my functions seem slower, or it seems like I don't have as much hydraulic power, or one of my cylinders doesn't feel like it has as much power as the rest of them. And trying to, if you don't know how that machine is supposed to run, it's going to be really hard to figure out what the customer is talking about. Especially something like it's obvious when you've got a cylinder gushing oil out, or a function won't work at all. Right. If you got a major component failure, that's pretty fucking easy. But when it comes down to them little things like maybe your load sense is a little too low, or your differential pressure's fucked up, or something like that, that's really minute, it's kind of hard to figure out sometimes. But so I know we talked a little bit before we started recording about, you kind of wanted to cover health insurance, and you had a story about a kid that, left his current job, and you don't really feel like he's getting his bang for his buck, even though he's getting a higher hourly wage. You didn't really feel like his new job is giving him the same bang for his buck as the old job. So why don't you kind of dive into that and explain that to us?
I don't necessarily know what all they hired him at, but just in the situations that we've had with people that have applied, they look at what the hourly wage is, and it's like, well, literally what some of them have said is that won't even buy me beer and pizza.
Yeah.
Well, they don't sit down and take a pen and pencil and figure out, where I work out at the county, they pay 100% of your health insurance. And it's Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's good insurance. My wife, where she used to work, had the exact same policy before I worked here, and it was costing us $750 a month. Well, where I work at, that's the deductible for one person, $1,500 for family. So,
and they pay for all that?
Yeah, 2 months. It
Yeah.
paid for our monthly premiums forever.
Yep.
Just in kids nowadays, younger, well, not even just younger. There's people that are I'd say middle age even. They just look at that money. Here's so many dollars an hour, and it's like, well, that's not worth my time. It's like, well, you figure out how much that benefit is worth, and it all of a sudden, if you put that to dollars, you are making dollars, and that's not coming out of your pocket. That's coming, the county's paying for it, or your employer. I know there's other employers that do it too. Not very many that'll pay.
Yeah, usually only government jobs do that.
Yeah.
And even then, some of them don't.
No, but there's other benefits that are in with your job, and when you're looking at it, you need to look at those benefits and see. And I know you've touched on before the idea of having your weekends.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these other jobs, you're working either half a day every Saturday, or half a day every other Saturday, or maybe you're working all day every other Saturday.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of places go 4-10s, and that way they've got Friday, Saturday, Sunday or something. And they don't allow us to do that. It's been brought up before, but they seem to think we need to be there at least 5 days a week, which I like having my weekends, other than if we're pushing snow, and it always seems like you push snow on Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah. Yep. I had an ex-boyfriend that worked for a city in Colorado, worked for a city as a mechanic. And I remember he had like amazing benefits. He had amazing like rolling holidays, which I had never heard about before in my life until I started working there. Like rolling holidays, every single holiday you could possibly think of was either a rolling holiday or you got it off. His time off was amazing, stuff like that. But snow shift was, if it threatened, especially in this part of northern Colorado, because they are California transplants into northern Colorado, and if one flake of snow falls, everybody loses their shit, right? And so that's what they would do if it threatened. And it was like 40% chance. There was like a 40% chance of snow. They were on snow shift, 12-hour rotations.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll get called out. I mean, and we try not to go out until it's done snowing because it really doesn't do much good until it does. And we're in North Central, by the way. So
North Central what?
Kansas.
Okay, Kansas.
We're, I don't know, 50, 60, probably 60 miles. No, it's not that much. 30. Probably 40 miles from the Nebraska border. And so, we used to get a lot of snow. We don't get as much anymore. But when we do, if we get a big snow, it'll usually dump about 6 inches or so. And then we need to get out and get the roads off. We just got through with one that it was basically dry enough, it blew off. The only place that it was where it was drifting across the road, we had to go bust it up, but it really wasn't all that bad to get off. But, we've got plows on our dump trucks is what we use, and the motor grader on the gravel roads.
Yep. Well, this part of northern Colorado was, that sounds a lot more like, where I'm living now and in Wyoming, where, they wouldn't necessarily, I'm just going to say this was Boulder, Colorado. Okay, everybody knows that Boulder, Colorado is like the hippie weed California central of this part of the country, right? And if the bike weren't cleared after like 6 inches of snow, people were calling the city and bitching. So, if they didn't have snow plow trucks out like actively clearing every flake of snow, people were gonna bitch because it was just full of entitled people from California that were not used to the snow. So all the rest of us locals are like, dude, it's winter time.
We got people moving here from Colorado because the Californian ones are moving to Colorado, and that's what we've heard. Is we're just tired of them.
Yep. Well, I never understood, because growing up, I grew up in southern Wyoming and northern Colorado. That's where I grew up, and that's where I lived my entire life up until a year ago. And I've always heard, that was just a thing, right? People in northern Colorado, in Denver specifically, they drive like Californians. That's what we always said. They're like, they're all Californians. They all drive like Californians. Well, that's just been instilled in my head. I had never been to California, but that's just been instilled in my brain since I was little. Then I go to LA 3 times this year for music video stuff, and driving those interstates, I'm like, oh my fucking God.
Now you know what they're talking about.
Now I know what you're talking about, because where I'm living now, in a different part of the Midwest, where I'm living now, it's, the interstate is going, and we're doing 70, 80, and then it'll slowly slow down, right? And everybody slowly slows down. Well, in Denver, it's we're doing 80 and then we're doing 10, and then we're doing 80 and then we're doing 10. And I just thought that's how interstates worked. Well, no, it is not. It is literally only the places where Californian people live. It is California, and then it is the Front Range of Colorado, because nowhere else does that. But a little off topic, but I went on a rant. But yeah, so the whole health insurance thing, like I told you, earlier, I didn't even really dive into it because I was still on my parents' insurance until last year, my birthday of last year, when they had to drop me because I turned 26. And I don't know if a lot of people just don't sign up for it or don't do it, or they just see a plan that is the cheapest and go there. Like I told you, I spent an hour on the phone with my mom going over health insurance plans and which ones are the best to choose from. And I don't think, like you said, I don't think a lot of people take health insurance benefits into consideration unless they're a family, then they might. But yeah, I think that's.
Well, and the younger people have I'm healthy and I'm going to live forever attitude. Which
My dad has that attitude. And
I was
he's
younger.
60.
I was, felt that way too. I'm not going to, die. I don't need health insurance. I never get sick. And I really don't. I'm pretty healthy. I don't get sick a lot. I was recently diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which that was a nightmare, but got that under control. And I'm healthy as can be through all this COVID stuff and all that. I've been just healthy as anybody else in the family or better.
Yeah.
Which is weird. It shouldn't be that way because supposedly I'm supposed to catch everything just even flies by me now. But I've always had a really good immune system. So I've never worried too much about health insurance myself.
Yeah.
First time I went to the doctor's office, I'd thrown out my back and I went down there and they looked for my file and I said, "You're probably not going to find one because I don't come in here except for physicals. It's probably really thin." And yeah, they found it and there wasn't nothing in there but CDL physicals every year. And that was it.
Yep.
But as you get older or if you had a family, then this stuff starts coming up. And, if it's there, that's part of your benefit package. And that's money either coming out of your pocket from your wages, or if they're paying for it, then you're not having to pay for that up front like that.
Yeah.
And you just got to figure that in. You just can't look at the dollar amount per hour and just go off of that. There's other factors you just really need to sit down and think about and how things are going to be in the future.
Well, another point that we sort of touched on along this line of topics was, retirement investments and 401ks and Roths and stuff like that. I started my first account at Honda Equipment when I was 19. And I think I was 19. Yeah. I think I was like either barely 18, like almost 19, or I was 19 when I started at Honda. And that was, I had no idea. I didn't know anything about it. All I knew is that my mom told me I should have it, right? And this whole, like, companies match a certain amount, but it's only up to a certain amount. And then it's like a full match, but it's only a certain amount of percentages. And like the years that you're in the company changes that percentage, like the matching percentage and stuff like that. So, I started looking kind of heavily into that. And I started, especially like last year or the year before, I was putting in like 25% of my profits into the 401k and the Roth because, I can make money right now and that's great, but in the future,
right.
I don't want to be that person that worked my life away and made great money while I was doing it. But now I'm 75 and I still have to, I want to be able to retire. I want to have that option. I want to be able to retire if I want to, obviously, I've met a bunch of people that, actually the old truck driver for Four Rivers, who was also my farrier, he was like 65 and he could have retired like 5 years ago, but he was bored. And so he just decided to stay. And like, he was a truck driver. He just drove trucks for us.
But he's got the option.
Yeah, he's got the option for it. He didn't have to be there, and which he reminded my boss of multiple times, which was great. But he had some fire in him for being 65, I tell you that. But
well, 65 is not old.
He was between 65 and 70. I do not remember exactly what age he was, but he was it was pretty awesome because he did not have a problem telling my boss exactly how the fuck he felt, which was great because it was actually the same thing all of us were thinking.
Yeah.
He just didn't care and he'd say it anyways, which was pretty funny. He is important things. It's about important things, right? Like his truck needs to be safe and functional, and there's shit that's broke on it that needs to be fucking fixed. And tie downs and the proper training and the proper way to tie down combines and 9Rs and all the shit that was really important. Pilot cars, and because we hauled a bunch. We hauled combines. We had our own, like the dealership had their own trucking, which was Mike's job. And you had to have pilot cars and you had to have all kinds of shit and flags and oversized loads. And we got away with doing the agriculture thing where you don't actually have to have permits or a CDL if you're hauling within, I think it's like 125 miles of your home base, as long as it's considered agriculture, which we were because we were an agriculture dealership. But still, like, if we were hauling out of state, which we were right on the Colorado border, so we did all the time, he got on our boss about permits and about pilot cars and all this proper shit that you need. So, which, the previous truck driver just didn't give a shit. He'd just haul anything and just didn't give a shit.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I know like the first, 10 years or so, 10, 12 years, I didn't have, where I worked at was a family owned business and there really wasn't a benefit package at all. No
Yeah.
health. We had health insurance through my wife's office and there wasn't. It was a good place to work, fantastic place to work, but no retirement, nothing like that to build up. It was on you, and never thought about that. Well, then I went to work for John Deere, and we had a 401k with matching and all that, and some investments and stuff. And so I didn't start anything at all until I was, I would have been 30 something. And then, then I ran my own business. So I was still putting a little away, but there still wasn't what I would call adding to that retirement as much as what my wife, where she worked at, she had Capers, which is, Kansas. I can't remember what it's for, but it's a retirement program and it's mainly through government, school districts, the counties, cities, stuff like that has that. And now that I'm on the county, I'm contributing into that program. And our secretary tells me I can retire in 8 years because I'll have my points in. Well, it won't be a very hefty retirement because I've only been putting into it for 6 years so far.
Yeah.
So, like I said, if you can start that young, that'll build up. I mean, somebody going into the county right now, say in their mid-20s or so, or even maybe a little older, by 55 or 60, they got full retirement benefits. I mean, that's great. I just tell everybody I'm going to work till noon the day of my funeral.
Yep. Well, obviously my ex at the time did not stay with the city job that he had. He had some issues with the mechanics he was working with were trash. Most of them were trash. Yeah. And it's impossible to fire anybody in that situation because they have the, what's it called? Union. They had the union and stuff like that. So he was just tired of working with people that didn't deserve to be there and didn't want to be there and just, floated along doing pretty much nothing, still getting paid the same wage that he was. Right. And so he didn't stay, but his mother was also working for the city and she busted her ass to get to where she was and to get the position she had with no college background or anything. And she ended up, she was making pretty good money and she had her retirement in to where you make 80%, I think. When you retire, you make 80% of your highest wage that you've held for 2 years or more. That's freaking good.
Yeah.
That is really good. There is no other retirement thing I know of that is that good. So, and she worked up to having a really decent hourly wage too. But, right. I think you're right. I've actually seen the exact scenario you're talking about where, we had a guy at one of the old shops I worked at that left us to go work for the county. And he worked there for a few months and I guess he couldn't afford, the wage cut was so drastic that he couldn't actually afford his monthly bills. And so then he came back to the dealership after that. But I'm not so sure that he didn't, really pay attention to the benefits he was getting from the county and really pay attention to, because from what I've heard, government jobs are the best way to retire. They've got the best benefits when it comes to things like that.
And some of the things that's hard is like, I don't know, at your dealership, are you paid every week or every 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
We're paid once a month.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you've got to budget that stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of times you got to set your when your payments come out and stuff like that, because you're paid once a month. We are anyway. That's the way ours is ran. And when I went from running my own shop to working down there, so there wasn't as much of a transition in that. But somebody that's coming from someplace where they're getting paid weekly or twice every 2 weeks, and then having to stretch that or learn how to stretch that out so that you still have your bills paid, but only get it once a month.
Mm-hmm.
You have your house and your car payment come out at the wrong time. All of a sudden you're broke and you got another week left to make your money stretch, So there's a little bit to that. There's some people that just can't seem to get their finances in line for a monthly pay like that.
Yeah. I've never heard of that before. Even the government jobs that I've known people to work in pay every 2 weeks. But that would be hard to budget. Even, I've gotten paid biweekly my entire career, with the exception of the ag dealership I worked at before I started working at Diesel Laptops. They paid weekly, which I had never had before.
Mm-hmm.
But weekly comes with a whole new perspective of, like, especially I own a house. I have owned a house for the last 7 years of my life. And when it comes down to your mortgage payment, you get paid. I was getting paid about $1,000 a week. And sometimes it's kind of easy to just blow that because you have it, right? It's kind of easy to just blow it. And then when your mortgage payment comes up, granted, I have my own personal business that, is a very healthy addition to my wages. But if that would have been the only money I was making at all, I would have had to really, because it's the exact opposite effect to where you're only getting paid. If you're getting paid weekly, you're getting paid less money at one time. So if you just blow it, it may not seem like you're blowing that much, but then you get towards the end of the month and it's time to pay your mortgage for the first of the month. You may not have that money in your account. I think every 2 weeks is the best way to do that, because the way I have my finances set up is I can pay my mortgage. My mortgage can be completely paid with one paycheck if it's a biweekly paycheck. So I just make sure that last paycheck of every month is for the mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I do it. But, obviously the way everybody likes to do their finances is different. And I did not have to pay health insurance on my own up until recently. So that was a whole nother thing of money coming out of my account that I'm not used to, that I have to account for. So I don't know if you've got anything to add on that you want to talk about the health insurance and paychecks and really paying attention to what you're getting into in a job. And
Oh, no, I think we talked about that pretty much. I know one of the other things you always talk about is how to get people interested in the industry.
Yeah.
And there again, I went to Votech here, and my original intent was to take all their mechanics courses. They had auto. At that time, they called it farm mechanics and diesel. And I took the first year of the farm mechanics, then I took auto mechanics, and they were going to let me get into the second year of diesel without having to take the first year. And I wound up getting married instead. It was the right thing to do.
Well, life, you work to live, right? You don't live to work.
Yeah. Been married 42 years now. So
that's awesome.
But
that's goals.
But and it was a Vo-Tech then, and now it's a tech college.
Yeah.
I'm glad I went through it when it was a Vo-Tech.
So you didn't have any, I take it when you went to it through Vo-Tech, that didn't have like the normal college classes, right? It was probably just.
Yeah, now they have to have their social science, their English, their math, that. I didn't have that.
Yeah, I agree.
Involved. And my original intent was to take all those, go back to my hometown, and start up my own shop. And life changes.
Yep.
And that's something else people need to realize. Yeah, you've got goals and you've got it all planned out. Something's going to throw you a curve and you're going to have to adapt.
Yep.
And
well, the beauty about the diesel industry is you can get a job wherever the fuck you want, now.
Yeah, now you can, yeah. And we, me and my wife both graduated Vo-Tech. She went through the business and she was at the same place for 40 years and retired from it. And she worked her way up through it. I mean, she didn't stay in the same position, but she didn't move. Now, my life, we throw in the blender about every 10 years and hit puree, I worked for the one place for 10 years and then went back into automotive and about a year and a half, and things had changed in 10 years.
Oh, I bet.
And
emissions and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, being a line mechanic and trying to catch up on 10 years, and they think you ought to do that in about 2 weeks of schooling, and that didn't work. So I went back into lawn and garden again and went to work for John Deere. They're our John Deere dealer, and I was with them for 13 years. And went through training. You talk about cornerstones or something, or what
capstones?
Capstones.
Yeah, that's on the yellow side of John Deere.
Yeah,
the green side doesn't do that.
Yeah, but I went through their hydraulics and electrical training.
Yep, all the core classes.
When they had the skid loaders out in Loudon, Tennessee, I was in the first school out there, and I was in the last school out there before they moved them.
Well, that was probably for skid steers and
that's when they came out. They were just
mini excavators. Did you have to do capstones for those on the ag side?
I don't remember anything called capstones. Okay. But yeah, it was just at the end of when New Holland was building them and Deere was just putting their engines in.
Oh, that's a long time ago. Okay. Yeah.
55, 75, stuff like that. And then I was out there for the very first, when the 250 or the 50 series came out, when Deere started building their own.
What do you think about that fuel rack idea that John Deere put in the motherfucking engines with the unit pumps?
The new ones?
The older ones, the mechanical. Well, I guess like like the 250 and the 333 CT skid loaders where they had the unit pumps and nozzles, and then they had a mechanical fuel rack that you had to like time and adjust each fuel pump for. You remember that?
I never got into that.
Oh, you're lucky. I fucking hated those. Well, they were literally like unit pumps, kind of like the D series. Have you worked on the D series at all?
Probably
not. The D series is like the electronic version, but instead of having one fuel pump that feeds injectors, it has a fuel pump for each individual cylinder. So, and those fuel pumps were ran off the camshaft. So they had cam lobes. And yeah, so
okay.
So they were ran off the camshaft, kind of timed by the camshaft, right? Because it's just like valves. Exactly how it's set up is just like valves, only for the fuel pump. Had his little roller and everything. And there's a fuel pump for each cylinder, and then that fed an individual nozzle for each cylinder. Well, there still was a little bit of timing that they needed in there. And so for the fuel pump, for the old ones, they had this fucking rack that went all the way down the side of all the unit pumps. And there was these little tiny nubs in the fuel pumps and they would hook into this rack. And the rack was connected to the fuel shutoff solenoid and the governor springs and all that set up, and the rack would pull this little nub, and it would twist on these unit pumps to advance or retard the timing of it. And trying to setting this shit up is like dial indicator, like super. You have to use a dial torque wrench, then you have to use a dial indicator, and you have to set all this shit up. It's, oh my God. I got good at it when I worked on the ag side because every fucking old farmer has one of them motherfucking things. And then they switched to the D series, which was then an electronic version of that. So they got rid of the fuel rail, the rail, the timing rack and shit like that. They got rid of all that shit. And it was still unipumps, but it was electronic solenoid unipumps. And then they had starting issues and the thing wouldn't start. And the unipumps and nozzles was just a horrible fucking idea. And I believe the E series finally got into, the E series had issues with the hydraulics. They had a Yanmar, I believe. That's when they started putting Yanmars back in the skid steers. And then they had hydraulic issues. So John Deere's just kind of gone through this cycle of like they either have a really shitty engine or they have a really shitty hydraulic system for their skid steers, and this like this back and forth fucking disaster. But their new G series, from what I understand, is pretty good. So the only thing I've done on those is fuel pumps and shit.
We've got
because those are common rail
skid loader at work, and I really liked the 250 or the 50 series when they had them. I thought they were pretty good, but these seem all right too.
The 250s. Trying to think. I'm pretty sure the 250 is the one with those have John Deere engines in it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, those are the ones with the mechanical fuel rack. And those were actually more reliable than the electronic unit pumps.
Yeah, the only thing I ever really had trouble with the engines on the 250s were the little rubber grommets on top of the injectors on the injector lines. We had they'd get loose or something or blow out, and we replaced those. And other than that, hydraulics and the motherboards up on the dash seemed to be the biggest problem.
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And New Holland had the same exact thing in those 55 series. And Deere had to have the same boards and stuff like that.
Yep.
Theirs, but for some reason, New Holland, they never had service bulletins out, never had any problems. They just said they never had any problems. Well, Deere got tired of doing their work for them, is what it amounted to, I think.
Yeah. Yep. I've replaced lots of those monitor control unit things in the old skid steers. Well, they do they can cause all kinds of weird, wacky shit.
Yeah. Brake all of a sudden sets and won't start, and it's fun to diagnose.
Oh yeah, especially because those old wiring schematics are not near as great as the new ones. But
we had one skid loader that when they first came out with those, you had to be a skid loader dealer in order to sell one, and there was only like 3 in the state of Kansas. And I had one that I had to drive almost 4 hours one way to work on. It made it a day-long job to go down and do what it was warranty work and maybe work on it for a half hour or an hour, but it was still a full day to go work.
That's how everything was in Wyoming, because everything's so spread out. Everything's at least an hour away. But that's skid loader, the skid steers and stuff like that. Obviously on the construction side, we deal a lot with those. Those are the smallest things we have on the construction side, but that and the mini excavators, which I'm not a fan of.
I've never even ran one of those yet.
I would much rather work on a 350 GLC, or an 870 87 metric ton, large mining excavator than touch a mini excavator. But that's just how I've always been. I like the big shit. But I told you my little background story on the only lawnmower I've ever worked on in my life. Yep. And I'm going to show everybody exactly how that turned out. I don't know if you can see that. This is a piston from one of them triple deck John Deere lawnmowers that obviously ate a valve and like I told him earlier, it had a crack this big down a parent bore block. So that was fun. And that was a learning experience on the fuel timing that I had fucked up from when I took it apart and didn't take it apart right. Learning experiences. And yeah, that was the last time I ever touched a lawnmower. I did touch a lawn and turf garden sized tractor a couple of times after that, but I did not touch it. I commend you guys that work on lawnmowers because I can't do it. I don't have the fucking patience for it. And I'd much rather work on the big shit. I'm small and I'd much rather work on the big shit.
That's what I would run into a lot. Guys would bring their lawnmowers in and says, I can't mess with this. And they work on their truck all the time. They got a semi they work on all the time. And it's like an engine, dude. I ain't messing with it.
Yep. That's how I am. Like I told you, I'd rather split the most pain in the ass tractor to split on the planet that's a large size tractor than touch another lawnmower. I fucking hate them things. But it's probably because I just don't have the experience in it. You know, all of my experience has been from the time I was 18, 19, all of my experience has been heavy duty. All of it. My schooling was all heavy duty. My schooling was all semis, actually. And then I spent like 4 months working on semis, and then I went right into a John Deere dealership, and I've worked at a John Deere dealership ever since, and mostly construction dealerships. And because of my construction background, when I went to start at an ag dealership for the first time, they just threw me into the heavy shit because they're like, well, you already know how to work on the heavy shit, so we're going to throw you into the heavy shit. And that's what I did. Was I mainly specialized in tractors. At both of the ag dealerships I worked at, I specialized in like the 7Rs or the 7000 series and up. Some of the older stuff, which I don't even know how to fucking categorize all the models, like the 44s and all that stuff are like the size of a 7R-ish. But that's pretty much all I worked on was tractors. A combine here and there and some swathers here and there, but mostly tractors. So the lawnmower thing is just not. I don't like it.
And like I said,
I don't like it.
Now I was starting from ground zero, really, 5 6 years ago, because learning about the after treatments and just more into the diesel engines. Like we wound up overhauling an N14 out of the Peterbilt that I drove. Yeah, that was fun. It was.
Oh yeah.
It was, timing the camshaft and stuff, and setting your follower plates, your timing and that on it. I mean, it was interesting. It was a little nerve wracking. And then when we hit that switch and she fires up, it just makes your heart feel so good.
Yep. The first startup after doing any kind of major engine work is the best. And doing actual rebuilds nowadays, like I don't consider short blocks or long blocks a rebuild.
Right.
That is not a rebuild. And to do an actual rebuild where you're doing jugs and you're doing the rotating assembly and bearings and all that shit, that's pretty rare to be able to do nowadays. And I've done a couple professionally. Most of mine have been my own shit, but I love it. Engine work. Everybody loves engine work. Every mechanic wants to do engine rebuilds.
Where we do our own work and we work on all our equipment ourselves, we hardly send anything out anymore.
That's good. Well, you guys are kind of sort of private in a sense, though. You're not like a dealership in a sense where warranty matters, right?
We now warranty stuff. Yeah, we have like our cat motor graders. We have cat come over and do any of the warranty work. We have a service program that we do up to a certain amount of time, where they do the work and supply the filters and all that, and then we take over after that.
Yeah.
But they used to send our semis and our dump trucks out because there was stuff that without a computer we couldn't deal with. We couldn't reset. Like when you do the after treatment, you have to do that. There's a proportion valve in there that you have to set. Well, without having a computer to plug into, you're at the dealer's mercy.
I've done many field calls over to counties and cities to just like they've already done the work, like injectors,
Yeah.
and shit like that. All they need is a reprogram or a calibration. I've done lots of little, like, throw my computer and a couple tools in the back of the parts truck and head over to the county, and, you know, at least you guys do the work though.
Well,
But
and we got worked over by a dealer a couple of times really good. And I mentioned, I just went out there and that's how I found Diesel Laptops, was just
okay.
happened to come across it. And it was when they were fairly new. And it, to tell you the truth, it really sounded too good to be true. You know, I looked
Yeah.
up cost to get, you know, to get Cummins, to get Kenworth, to get Cat, to get, you know, all the different brands. And if you went out there, you're spending gobs of money. And then don't update, you know, $2,000 every year for every single program, then they just, then you're off.
Yep.
Well, then with Diesel Laptops, it was a lot of money up front, but you know, you don't have to update it. We do the yearly premium update for it. I think it's $1,900 or something like that. And that way we get the updates, the monthly updates and everything. And we get the help and stuff. But that's all new to me. And being as how I was the one that suggested it, I guess I'm the one that gets to run the computer. So I'm having to learn all this stuff.
So what I actually would love to talk to you about that. You're one of the first customers I've ever had that has a Diesel Laptops. It also worked at a dealership. So I tried to look at the diesel repair website and stuff like that. I didn't see a goddamn thing on John Deere. So, which is fine. That's the only thing I know how to compare it to is John Deere. And so what is your perspective on the manuals and the diagnostics that they provide versus you've worked at a dealership, you've had the dealership support, you've had the dealership technology, and you've worked with that. So how would you compare that? Because I'm actually curious to know that.
I think that we are actually not using the computer as well as we should be or could be. Part of it is that we haven't had time to just play with it.
Yeah.
Every time we do something on it, we seem to learn more about it. When we first hooked up, when we got our new one, we'd had 3 years and we got our new computer. Every 3 years you get a new computer. And we hooked up to one of our John Deere tractors and it wouldn't let us. It just said it didn't read anything. Well, I contacted them and they said, no, it should. And of course, all the people on the internet say, nope, can't do that. And yeah, you can. And they're advertising that they're working on John Deere. And it was just something that when we got our new computer, they didn't get turned on. The guy fixed it in about 5 seconds. In fact, he got access to our computer. He said, oh, there it is. And so we were able to hook up and then see what our problems were. We've been real happy with what we can get.
You don't have to try and sell it to me. I'm curious to know your honest opinion.
Now, I worked for, like I said, for John Deere Lawn and Garden for 13 years, and they have really good flow charts, I think, in their manuals.
For diagnostics?
Yes.
Yeah.
But you start at number 1 and you go through it. You don't go and say, oh, well, I'm fine. I'll go to number 5. Because you're done then. It will lead you astray almost every time if you skip a step. We found out. And the laptops, like I said, I know we're not using it to its full potential, and I hope to get better at it. But I'm learning all kinds of things from day one. Like you're talking about a CAN bus. I don't have no idea what that is. Multiplexing. I haven't learned what that is yet.
I don't even know what fucking multiplexing is.
There's the two protocols. I can't remember what the numbers are now, but like a 19 or an 1800 something. And it makes a big difference on sometimes from what I've seen, which one you select. And
like the J1939 versus the other. Yeah.
And I'm not familiar with all that stuff really well yet. And
well, so you would probably, have a hard time with John Deere only had one diagnostic port, one
Mhm.
type of diagnostic port. So do you think that like diesel laptops does, obviously you don't know what you didn't know what a CAN bus was, right? You've only learned. Do you think that diesel laptops does it justice on helping with theories of operations in the same manner that, or close to the same manner that a dealership software would?
I think so because, well, like I said, I don't think we need to do better with using what they have to provide for us.
I mean,
And
dealership mechanics do the same shit, right?
yeah, you've got to
Yeah.
figure out, and you've got to go through, and this will tell you what your codes are. It will let you go in and see perimeters. It'll let you there's some things you can change or some things you can't. One of the things that we probably need to access is where we have access to the web access through it, and we don't. And it's a little extra money to do that, which I don't know whether we'll ever be okayed to do that or not, but getting into some of the fault codes and things like that, it's so much nicer. They give you an idea, they give you breakdowns, they give you flow charts through things. Their wiring diagrams are pretty good. They're not necessarily what you get with the dealerships. I think they've simplified them a little bit.
That's good. That's actually good. Complex is not always the best answer. That's good.
They've done their own, and they're a little bit more color coded. I mean, they're easier to follow through.
Yeah. Well, you're used to the ag side schematics. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you this right now from working on both sides. The ag side manuals and schematics you would think it was a different company wrote it compared to the construction side.
Yeah.
Like the construction side, especially for wiring diagrams, is so much fucking easier. But the problem is with John Deere is I can't tell you how many times I've ran into diagrams in John Deere itself. This is John Deere itself that I've ran into diagrams that are incorrect. Yes. And they lead you down a rabbit hole, right? Or their wires aren't there and you contact DTAC and you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah, they don't like it when you point out their mistakes either. We were at an electrical service school and me and another kid got paired up, and this kid was sharp. He'd taken over a shop from an older guy that he'd worked for, and he worked on everything from semis to chainsaws. And he was sharp. And they had us follow through a electrical schematic. And they said, follow this out and trace it all out, what the power side and all this is. And everybody else was done, and we weren't. And we just looked at each other and says, this doesn't work. Right.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you went through and tripped a relay, you sent all the power to a direct ground. It was shorted out.
What the fuck? That's not supposed to happen.
Of course, the guy up there, the instructor, all the rest of them have it. And he says, you guys having some trouble? You need a little help? And says, well, no, that doesn't work. He says, sure it does. It's right out of the manual. He says, we've been teaching it for like 3 years. It was like on a 333 or something, a bigger lawn tractor. And we said, no, it won't and we explained, as soon as you trip that relay, you're sending everything to direct ground. I said, it's a short. He looks at it, and cocks his head, and he looks at it, and he says, by God, you're right.
Yeah.
Been teaching that for years.
Well, these fucking teachers are, for the most part, these fucking teachers for these classes are like beginner engineers, and they send them through all these fucking trainings. Yeah. They're not like, you get a veteran engineer in them, into DTAC or into those training classes. It's great. But that's not usually what happens. It's usually the beginners, like the beginner engineers have to go through these capstone trainings and these basics trainings and stuff like that before they can. So it's like the blind leading the blind sometimes in an aspect of it. And, the best trainings I've ever had were in-house instructors that were old mechanics of 20, 30-year-old mechanics that went through all the trainings and then taught in-house classes, were certified to teach that. In the Cummins class that I did through John Deere. I did for the 9R tractors and the forage harvesters. They have the QSX 15 in them. And to get the scraper tractor series capstone, you have to have that Cummins QSX engine certification. That certification class, probably because it was led on by Cummins people, was the best training class I've ever had through John Deere. The best. Hands down the best. But like you said, that they get in there, and I've ran into it with DTAC too, where I'm looking at a schematic that's straight out of, because you know John Deere has like a diagnostic procedure for a code, but and it'll have a couple wiring schematics attached to that you can look at, like little tiny, like, you know, little tiny, like it broke the system up into little pieces, and it's like, here's this wiring schematic for this little piece of this diagram, and here's this, and here's. Well, I'd be going off of those on some of my stuff, and I'm looking at these because most of them are just like little pins, like, you know, the pin numbers and locations from this connector to this connector and the wire colors and all that shit. And that's, you know, what I would use a lot to diagnose, because you always start big, right? If you know you have a problem on a wire, you start big and then you work in to try and figure out where that break is or whatever. I can't tell you how many times I've been led astray, completely the fuck astray, because the wiring numbers and codings and colors and pin numbers that they have in that little schematic was a generic schematic, not that machine specific one. And it just would leave me way the fuck astray. So then I'd contact DTAC, right? And you list out everything you've done, all the steps you've taken, all the readings you've had and everything. And they're like, you're not even on the right schematic. This is actually the right schematic. And then they send you a link to a different part of the theory of operation or a different CTM, right? Like component technical manual for the right schematic. And you're like, well, what the fuck? Yeah. Like, why couldn't you just put that schematic in here? But, you know, with their whole new, what really happened was when they updated to Service Advisor 5, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Service Advisor 5. No, were you around with that? Yeah. Okay, so Service Advisor 4, which I'm sure is what you were used to, the actual computer program that was not online, that you had to go through service performance to do updates and stuff like that. The old Service Advisor, I'm sure, is what you're used to, which I worked with for about a year before they switched to Service Advisor 5. And Service Advisor 5 is kind of nice because you can search things, and it's linked to DTAC, and it's linked to all this other stuff. But I feel like the manuals that were linked into the schematics and shit that were linked into the codes and stuff in the original Service Advisor, I don't know if it's 4 or 3 or whatever that original Service Advisor was called, was much more accurate than all these hyperlinked manuals that they have now in Service Advisor 5. But I mean, I love Service Advisor 5 for like reprogramming stuff is easy. The only problem is they have like an 18,000 step, which they finally started to get rid of and make it simplified. But when they first came out with Service Advisor 5, reprogramming an ECU for an engine you rebuilt or replaced was a fucking nightmare. Fucking nightmare.
Well, I know when I worked for John Deere, it was in the 90s. So I don't think I was ever involved with Service Advisor. I had a computer, but it was a desktop computer just to do parts lookup and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. So you guys didn't have Service Advisor at all then?
Not long. But DTAC was, I don't know what your DTAC was, but ours is, like you said, they're engineers. They're not mechanics. You'd call in like, you've never heard of that before. Let us know when you figure it out, and let us know what you found. So a lot of times we got to do their work for them, is what I felt.
Yeah. Well, the engineers don't understand when mechanics look at something that's wrong with the machine, they're automatically, their brain's going through what's actually possible to be wrong and what's not. And what I feel like DTAC does sometimes is they have engineers that just have you test a bunch of random shit that has nothing to do with what the fuck you're looking at. And it's just a waste of time, you know? And we've had a couple issues of like, we had this motor grader that had auto, you're probably not going to be familiar with this, but it had auto grade, like the pro grade or whatever it's called.
And podcast,
Yep. And it wasn't the smart, it wasn't the, the smart grade with the top con stuff on it. It was just the stock smart grade on the grader. And what it would do is you would start grading, and the guy had it set up right to where he controlled one side and then the other side was auto controlled. That's how those work. But it would sit there and it would hunt, and it would leave like ripples into the dirt. Oh my fucking God. We spent, as a dealership, and John Deere, who actually came out to our dealership to try to help us with this, took us like 3 months to figure it out. 3 months. We tried every type of reprogramming and, all the shit. And we finally, I don't even remember what it was because it wasn't my machine to work on, but it was something with there was like a tiny little stick in one of the control valves for this pressure or something like that. But it took us and John Deere like 3 months to figure it out. It was a fucking nightmare. But they did the same thing where you were testing a bunch of shit that didn't even fucking make sense. Like it wasn't even relevant to I don't know. Sometimes you get people in there that are great, and other times it's not so much.
I'm a little impressed about with diesel laptops is when you call in, you talk to a mechanic.
Yeah.
And it just seems like things get done quicker and in a more logical fashion.
Yeah.
And we've only had to use that a couple of times. Usually it gives us enough information we can figure it out. But we have had a couple of things where we just did not have access to mainly the right wiring diagrams and the right way of working through. I think it was on our T800 Kenworth. And we called him up, and he was able to, he says, well, let me get back to you, and he's not blowing smoke. He said, don't know off the top of my head, but I'll find out and I'll give you a holler back. And I don't know, hour or so. And he was back and had answers for us or places for us to go look that we hadn't thought of trouble with, and we got it fixed. I've been real impressed with their technical help side, both in the computer side and in the mechanical side.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, like I said, my being born and raised in a sense in a dealership and never leaving a dealership, I never got the chance to experiment with any kind of aftermarket stuff. So, and I don't have anything to hook up with here, so it's not like I can just try it myself and see. I would love to dig through their fucking programming and just sit there and play on it. But I can't. I'm supposed to be traveling there hopefully soon, but
we haven't hooked up much on CAT yet because most of anything we have problems with so far has been under warranty, and just kind of hate to hook up and maybe mess something up.
Yeah.
So we don't do that, but I'm kind of looking forward to that, and I haven't had to hook into any of our case equipment yet. But our trucks we've done are internationals with I'll get it wrong, ISM 385s. Does that sound right?
The ISM, the new one, the brand new engine.
Yeah, these are 2005, 3 and 5 engines.
ISX maybe.
And I thought that was ISM, but
I don't know, honestly. I don't know. I'm not familiar with large Cummins, except for I thought it went from like the DT or the N14. I thought directly after that N14 series was the ISX, but I could be wrong. Honestly, I probably am. I don't know.
But
I know the new engine is not an ISX anymore. The brand new one.
Let's see, our Kenworth, one of them has the 13. Is it ISM 13? And then the newest one has a pack car in it, and the oldest one, we have a couple old Freightliners. One has a CAT, one has an N14. And then my Peterbilt had an N14. And
I had an old 5-ton military truck with the ancient version of an N14.
Yeah,
it was that was cool. It had the 3 individual heads, and it was, yeah, I don't remember exactly what the model of that engine was, but it was pretty much an N14. It's cool as fuck. I miss that truck.
like an 855 that was in a versatile tractor, probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, that sounds familiar. Familiar.
They're
It's
basically the same engine.
yeah, it looked exactly like an N14. It just wasn't an N14.
Yeah.
But it had like, you could have like high flow and low flow cooling systems and like all kinds of shit that I loved that truck, but I had to get rid of it, which my neighbor has a junkyard full of them motherfuckers. So one day I will have another one.
Yeah.